Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Fast Performance Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Cole Thomas, and on this week's episode, we have a very special guest, Stephanie Hale-Burkhart. Stephanie is a mental skills coach for the Seattle Mariners organization, working with athletes all the way from the top to the bottom, but she primarily focuses on basically AA and below. Stephanie and I go way back when I was a head coach at East High School in Denver, and she was a graduate student at the University of Denver. And in that time, the University of Denver was using students to go out into the field into the Denver public school system to work with the athletic teams. And Stephanie, just lucky enough for us, happened to be on our team. So she's done a lot of cool stuff ever since. She used to work at IMG Academy, where she worked with the baseball program and as well as other athletics there. She's a really valuable resource. I know you guys will really love her. Programming note on this: the audio is a little wonky. I pressed the wrong button because I am a moron, and the audio is fine. It will just sound like Stephanie and I are talking to each other on the phone, so it'll just be a little weird. Just bear with us. The information is really awesome. It's very, very valuable, and I know you guys will get a lot out of it. Let's talk to her.
Stephanie, thank you so much for coming in. It's great to see you. Actually, great to have you in studio as opposed to some Zooms. Well, the last couple of guys, like more coaches, I've been doing Zoom stuff with them. So it's happy to see you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me in. It's good to reconnect and do it in person.
I know, right? So for people who don't know who you are, and I recommend if you don't follow Stephanie already, you should. And it's probably should be required following at this point for you. Can you give everybody an idea of who you are, who's Stephanie, what got you into the sports psychology realm, and especially into the baseball realm, because you were a soccer player growing up.
Yeah.
Just I would love this. Be great to see you out in Australia and New Zealand right now with the U.S. team.
Yeah, it's been kind of an interesting journey with a lot of different paths, but obviously it's all led me now here to baseball, and I love doing what I do. Trying to sum it up, who I am and where I come from. I grew up in Southern California for most of my life, and I mentioned that I think it's relevant just because I had access to play sports year-round, something I started to do from a young age. And actually, baseball was the first sport that I ever played at 5 years old, and that was more first friend you meet in kindergarten was like, I play baseball. You want to play? And I was like, yes. Went and told Dad. Dad was like, are you sure you don't want to play softball? I was like, no, baseball is it. Tyler's playing baseball, I'm playing baseball. So that's really where it got started, and then a couple years later, I started to actually pick up soccer. My sister had played, so I started playing soccer, and baseball and soccer were the two things growing up, basically until I became a freshman in high school. Continued to play soccer, but that's where I started to make that shift into softball. Boys got bigger, faster, stronger, and I couldn't really keep up in a lot of ways, so decided to make that shift just before getting into the high school season. And as I was going through, especially getting into those high school years, things started to get more competitive. I started to recognize at that point that this mental side of the game might be a thing. I had a really hard time shaking off mistakes, and I can think of a very distinct period, like sophomore, junior year of high school. I was having a hard time where I'd get into situations, whether it was in softball or in soccer. It's I end up in a 2-strike count in a critical situation, or I end up, shanking a breakaway, and it's now all of a sudden Steph's out for the next 15, 20, 30 minutes because I can't shake off this mistake and bounce back. And so that's kind of where I started to recognize it. I knew I needed to look into this thing because it didn't matter how physically, technically prepared I was, how much I'd practiced. It was there was this other component that I wasn't ready to handle, and it was clearly impacting the way that I was able to go out, execute, compete the way that I wanted to. So I started looking into sports psychology in high school and found out that it was a thing. What I thought about it.
I know.
Yeah. What I thought about it and what I understood at that point, obviously, was super surface level, but I was like, okay, there is a thing. There's something out there that can help athletes going through what I'm going through. And I started to just look into it for myself. And so as I got into college and things like that, I continued to play soccer through college. And it was still kind of a thing that I knew was there. In some ways, I got better at handling it. In some ways, it was still kind of present for me. And so I would just kind of look into my own, either do research or read articles or find books and things like that and try to figure out what do I need to do while I was studying general psychology going through undergrad. And then once I got through undergrad, my last 2 years, had a great advisor, and she was like, hey, look, here's some different programs. If you want to make a career out of this thing, there's ways to do that, but you got to look into grad school. So she kind of pushed me in that direction. I knew it was something I really wanted to do, was really passionate about, especially as I started to parallel my own like playing experience with it. But once I kind of graduated, stopped playing soccer, decided to hang them up, I knew that sports psychology and figuring out how to make a career in that was my next step. And that's what led me to go into grad school at the University of Denver. So I was there for 2 years between 2016 and 2018. That's where we had the opportunity to meet. Yep, working with East. And that's kind of what actually brought things full circle back to baseball for me, which I really enjoyed. And it was just, it seemed like such a seamless fit. I'd always still loved the game. I still followed the game even though I wasn't playing as much. It was definitely more in the soccer world. But I think just the amount of like thought you have to manage when it comes to baseball, it's a different dynamic than when you think about sports like soccer, hockey, lacrosse, that kind of stuff. Which I still think sports psychology and mental skills is really relevant, but the way that it shows up is just a little bit different.
Well, because there's in soccer and like hockey, like it's just constant motion. There's almost no time to think.
Exactly.
Where in baseball, there's too much time to think.
Exactly. And so understanding the skills and strategies in baseball just seem to have such a more profound impact. And I think the need for it is like much more well understood in baseball than it is in some of those other sports at this point.
Right. So now you get, unfortunately, like when I was coaching, I mentioned this in the intro, like when you and I were coaching at East, I only got to work with you for half that season.
Yeah.
Because obviously there was a little bit of shenanigans that was going on in the Denver East program at the time. And that's where, unfortunately, AJ and I, when we took over, like we only got you for the second half of the season. It was where like I felt like I could have learned so much from you that whole season had we taken over at the right time, or you had stayed a whole extra half year or whatever.
Yeah.
But I, from my experience with you guys, it was you, and I'm so bad because I feel really bad, like to shout out everybody else that's involved in the program. Yeah. It's just you've been the bigger name out of the whole group, and like I was saying this for like teams. If you guys ever have an opportunity to utilize something like what Steph and everybody else at the University of Denver, like it's so good. Because I mean, I think our team was better. There was also a little bit of a level of give a damnness. There was a little bit. We had some issues with East, which I think is just an East problem, not just a general problem. But I think you guys really, really helped us in cultivating a better winning culture there. And then obviously we ended up leaving anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So now let's go and talk about what you do with the Mariners now. And I mean, I was doing a little bit more research. You're up on the come up right now. you're getting yourself a big name. Like I read your Men's Journal article that you were in. There's a bunch of podcasts you're on. I feel so humbled to have a star like Stephanie on her.
Oh my God.
So what are the specific things that you work on as a professional baseball team mental skills coach? Like, and you work from the top all the way down to the bottom.
Yeah.
Dealing with all sorts of different personalities, different egos, different. Yeah. And I imagine like the older guys are just like, I've been in the big leagues for 10 years now. What the hell are you going to teach me? And then versus the rookies who are like, tell me everything. I want to know everything.
Yeah. So there's definitely different, I would say, like developmental areas, right? And depending on like where a player's at, what their needs are, it's interesting because I have the pleasure of at least being able to work with a team of people. So there's really 3 of us in the mental skills side of things, really working on the on-field performance type stuff. Like how are we managing the pressures? How are we maintaining confidence? That kind of stuff. How are we evaluating our outings and making sure that we're paying attention to the right things so that when we need to make adjustments, we're not over-adjusting, but we're also not just doing the same thing over and over again. I say that because with those 3, it helps us manage just the amount of players that we have. And we have one of our coaches right now who's primarily responsible for the big leagues in AAA. And then me and another coach are pretty much responsible for basically AA down, and we kind of split those responsibilities and make sure that we're on a rotation, giving enough touch points throughout the years to those staff and players. But the big thing that we're all working on, regardless of the level, this is going to sound like an oversimplification, but we'll unpack it, right, is just trying to help players understand what it takes to stay focused on the right thing at the right time, one pitch at a time. And really being able to stay focused on those things. And not just be focused, but be focused on the right thing in the right way in order to simplify everything. And a big underpinning of what we do and what we believe is that the quality of your thoughts impacts the quality of your movements. And so when it comes to things like getting your best swing off, right? Like a lot of times when guys are struggling or they're whiffing a lot and they're like, Steph, I don't know what to do. And initially our first response is to go swing mechanics, right? Like I want to go to manipulating something there. And it's like, well, we maybe need to start somewhere else first. Like, did you know what you were looking for? Were you all in on that? Were you caught between pitches? Like things like that. Because if I am caught between pitches, the swing mechanics don't matter. They're always going to be, right? It's always going to be this imperfect version of what I actually want. And so all of this to say, one of the biggest things that we try to work on is how do we help players get to the point where they can think clearly and move freely so that their prep can come out and I don't have to overthink or over-manipulate my body to actually go do what I want it to do. If we want the highest end of our capabilities to show up that top-end skill, we have to make sure that we're getting to the point where we're thinking super simple, super clear. We have this external focus by the time the pitch is thrown.
Right. So what are, and hopefully for the majority of the audience is mostly amateur athletes like college, high school, and all that. So I hope this is a good platform for them to realize, oh, even pro guys have the exact same issues I have. What are the most common mental challenges that you see in professional baseball players? I'm imagining confidence maybe number one.
Yeah.
And, like how, when you, in dealing with those types of mental challenges, like, if you've ever worked with, Kalinick, or you worked with Julio Rodriguez, or you've worked with, whoever, I'm blanking on some of the ones on the team now.
Go through the roster.
Yeah, I know, go through the whole thing. But Julio has confidence. I mean, as swaggy as he is, and he looks like he has no, limitations on his confidence. He probably does in the back, and maybe we work on Jack Kalinick not kicking water buckets. Out of frustration. But what are the most common challenges you see, throughout all the levels, and how do you address and help them overcome those challenges?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Probably one of the biggest things is confidence, right? And it kind of operates on this spectrum. And really when we think about confidence, what we're talking about is players' abilities to just trust, like, can I go do what I've prepared to do? And I think that a lot of times it's like when the pressures come up or the fears come up or, the lack of results start to show up, and it's like now all of a sudden there's things like fear and worry and doubt. And it's all a distraction, really. Like, we can boil it down, and that's taking my focus away from where it needs to be right now. It's pulling me out of the present. It's putting me into a worse perspective where now, maybe I feel like I have less control of things than I actually do, or maybe I'm trying to control too many things. I'm overcomplicating what I'm trying to do. But I think confidence is probably one of the bigger things, and I think that it's kind of that gateway between, like, do I understand who I am, what I want to do, what I can do with this career, and then where do I actually have to go execute it by the time I step in the box or step on the mound. And I think that when it comes to confidence and being able to build that trust, we want to rely a lot with any of these players, whether it's the Julios of the world all the way down to our guys in the DR Academy. Like, we're just trying to help them understand, what does it take for you to have confidence and trust in what you're able to do? And then how do we build this unshakable confidence so that you know that not just your body is ready to go compete, but that your mind is ready to handle the challenges that the game is going to inevitably throw at you, right? We all know how hard this game is. But if you're practicing or preparing in a way that doesn't actually get your mind ready for what could happen in a game, not just what should happen, then we're probably leaving a lot on the table, and we're actually not preparing in a very meaningful way, which means that by the time that you do step in the box, something's going to be able to pull you from your plan or what you're trying to do. So you kind of have to build that resilience and ability to understand, like, where is my confidence rooted? How do I make sure that something else can't take it away from me? And when I start to notice that it's wavering a little bit, because it will at times, then what am I actually going to do to evaluate, like, what's going on? Where do I need to actually, like, strengthen some areas or reinforce some areas to make sure that by the time I step in the box again, I've made the correct adjustment?
Are there specific strategies that a player could utilize when they have those dips in confidence, right? And I think, because I get texts all the time, and I know you get texts all the time, of just like, I feel like it's like a kid has a bad outing, and it's just like, I went 2 innings, I gave up 10 runs, and I had 4 or 5 walks, and you just know, like, this kid's like, he's probably like right on the edge.
Yeah.
Or he's just like, dude, it was one game in a summer ball league, you're a sophomore in high school,
yeah.
Or like you're a AA player, right? What are some strategies, like, where we don't have to get those texts? Like, don't get me wrong, I like the text, I like the attention, but it's like I need you to kind of help yourself here a little bit. Like, what are some strategies that guys can use when they have those dips of confidence?
Yeah, really good question, because I think this is where we all get stuck the most, I think the biggest thing, there's kind of like it's almost a two-pronged approach, and there's kind of the like bigger zoomed out piece, the perspective you talked about, like sophomore, summer ball, like your career is bigger than this game, this week, this summer, you know, and so just helping guys understand that. But I think the other piece is like, you know, what are the most important things that you actually need to evaluate? So do you understand like what your actual priorities are? So if we're talking about like some of our pitchers going out and throwing, right? Like for them, I would probably want them to understand like, okay, let's kind of break this into what was the process, what was the results, right? There's a lot of times where you execute a pretty good process and you just get unlucky, right? And then there's also times where you have a pretty terrible process and you also get rewarded with results, and it's like, that's not great, you know. And I feel super fortunate that at the Mariners we have different tools and ways of providing that information in a pretty clear and simple way, but getting guys to understand like, okay, what was my process between pitches? Did I have a plan, right? Like, do I know in which, like if I'm in an early count, do I know typically like this is what pitch I'm throwing and this is where I'm targeting it? So did I do that? Okay, cool. Yes, I was committed to that, or no, I didn't. Okay. Maybe in a finish counts, right? I have a really hard time keeping it out of the zone. Like, okay, well, maybe that's the place that I really need to hone in on this week. Like, I was really good early and behind, but I was terrible when I was in a finish count, and that's what got me into trouble. Or maybe it's one of those things where, like, I was really bad in early counts, puts me into bad counts, and now it's a tough situation, which is probably more common, especially for some of our younger guys. But it's just looking at, like, okay, what was my process? Was I able to get control between pitches? You know, was I able to, like, at least adjust plans, especially for, like, our starters? Was I able to make an adjustment inning by inning? And so it's like, if I understand what the most important pieces are to me, I can almost kind of, like, fact check, okay, I did do this well, I didn't execute this, now I have a plan for this is what I'm going into the practice week, or, like, go into my throwing program knowing that I'm going to really hammer down on this. So I think that's the first part. The second part is more like the in-game managing, like what's actually happening, what I'm feeling, and I can imagine a lot of times when things aren't going well, that's when the game starts to speed up. That's when all of a sudden I have a really hard time simplifying, getting to a clear plan. I can feel my heart racing. I'm like tense. My body doesn't feel like it's working right, or maybe it's heavy and it feels slow, like whatever it is, right? And so something that we like to talk about with all of our players really is, do you have a process between pitches? And we've heard about this for forever, right? Like your pre-pitch routine, whether you're getting ready to get in the box or you're getting ready to step on the mound, like what is the thing for you that helps you get present for what am I doing right now? Can I get control of my mind and body? And so we leverage a lot of breath work with our players in order to do this, right? The way it controls your psychophysiology. I don't think there's any better skill for that, so we push that a lot.
You're very big on that. I know.
Yes. Because if I can get to that point where I am in control of my mind and body, okay, now I can get to a point where I can get to a clear plan, and more importantly, I can get to that plan in a visual, right? And we kind of know, if we look at some of the research, like when I can think of something in a visual, that extra noise, that extra chatter, it's not cluttering my head. When I have a visual, it kind of shuts off the analytic side of my brain, and now it's like a lot more clear. My body's going to be able to follow that a lot more simply and get back to executing the way that I've prepared, like we talked about earlier. And I think then the last piece is, are you all in committed on that, right? Like we've all had that point where it's like, okay, I'm throwing a slider here. But what, okay, actually I'm throwing fastball, boom, right? You know, and it's like.
Right. Well, not totally committed, like if your coach calls pitches or whatever. I know there's a lot of coaches in this state are not very good at calling pitches.
Yep.
And there's a lot of guys who are just like, I don't have confidence in that pitch in this count, right?
Yes.
I had that before. I had a kid 2 years ago where I called a curveball. It was like a 1-2 count. And I don't know if I called a curveball for him. He literally looks over me and just shakes his head like, no, I'm not going to throw that. And I said to him like, and it's one of like, in the heat of the moment, I was a little upset by him. I'm just like, you know how to throw that. Just don't do it.
Trust it.
But then I'm like, well, fine, fastball, and he throws a waste pitch. And then he throws a curveball, strikes the kid. I'm like, why couldn't you done that the pitch before?
Yep. It's tough. But it is like, in those moments, right? Like whatever you're going to be convicted in is probably what you have the best chance. But then, right, like how does he maybe look at that and then look at the evidence of like, I did throw the curveball. Why couldn't I have done that on a 1-2 count, you know? And so I think that it's just being able to kind of like fact check that, have meaningful evidence to be like, what actually mattered between results and process, what went well, what didn't. This is what I'm going to go work on. And then you have more confidence in that the next time you step on the mound. But then also, do I understand how to manage that moment and that between pitch process so that I can be as clear as possible, which is going to give me the best chance to execute.
Right. So I remember when I read the Men's Journal piece, it kind of opened the piece opened with Cal Raleigh hitting that home run last year that sent you guys into the postseason. Mm-hmm. And so I would really like how they kind of noticed, like, high pressure situation. This is going to be the first time Seattle gets to the postseason in God knows how long. Probably when you and I were probably not even 10 years old the last time. But the Mariners have made the postseason until last year. And so, Cal's in it's a massive situation for not only him, but the organization, the entire city of Seattle, So, he steps into the box, and I'm sure you worked on things like that, and there are plenty of guys who will come in like, I have a situation, I need to go execute a hit and run, or I need to go score that there's the winning runs on third base or in scoring position.
Yeah.
What are strategies that you use to help the Mariners players just understand, like, how can they keep their cool and keep their demeanor in like these larger than life situations?
Yeah. Truthfully, I think part of it is helping them acknowledge it's probably going to feel different, but the job is the same job he's done all year.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a part of it that's, I don't ever want to go in there. I know sometimes the approach can be like, it's just the same thing, but then a player's like in that situation and they've got the butterflies, the heart racing, and they're like, this is not the same thing.
Cut with a butter knife.
Yes, exactly that.
Like that. Yeah.
Exactly that. And so I think that part of it is just like helping them acknowledge, like, you will feel this way and it's fine. Like, you know what to do. And our hope is by the time that they find themselves in those situations, they have at least enough of a foundation to understand basically like what tools are in my toolbox and which ones can I pull based on however I'm responding. And so a big thing for us is trying to help them get to understand basically like, what am I going to feel in my body? How do I feel this in my body? And then how do I get more control of it, right? So for an example, if we look at that type of a situation, where it's like a little bit high pressure, I like probably could be tempted to press a little bit in this like bigger event, right? Bigger experience. And it's like, that's probably when you're going to start to feel like, okay, be tempted to get the thoughts racing, like heart's racing, breathing sped up, starting to feel like maybe a little antsy in my body, which isn't always a bad thing, but okay, how do I know that I have control of that? Because if it's not a bad thing, great, I just need to understand how I use it, And so like a lot of things that we'll do, we'll try to help players prepare themselves to understand what is the experience in my body when I'm feeling it, and then how do I get to my point of like control. And we kind of call it like their sweet spot, right? I think a lot of times there's almost this myth, I say in baseball, but it's probably true in any sport, where it's just like, okay, I need to be calm and relaxed. And it's like, truthfully, calm and relaxed isn't always good either. That's when things become passive and I'm like maybe not as sharp as I want to be. Like, pressure is a good thing. The biggest moments in sports happen with pressure, But in order to help prepare our players for what they might feel and understand how they can build trust in their ability to regulate that, comes with doing things like, we put them in ice tubs. That's a huge part of what we do, right? And we want to put them in cold tubs. There's a ton of physiological benefit to that. So that is also a piece of what we do. But if we're just talking about the psychological piece of it, you get into a cold tub, your immediate response is like get out. Like, I don't want to be here right now, Body's uncomfortable, heart starts racing, body tenses up, and then all of a sudden we start to walk them through it.
That's some pressure right there.
Exactly. And your body responds the same way, whether it's a like emotional experience, high pressure situation in the game, like your body's gonna heart racing, like muscles tense. I kind of get that feeling. And like, truthfully, when it's in those high pressure situations, I probably should know this, but I'm pretty sure Cal's in that situation and he's behind in the count, right? Like, I'm pretty sure it's like,
I don't remember the exact specifics.
Yeah, I think it's 1-2. I'm gonna have to check this. I'm gonna shoot you a text later and be like, I was right or wrong.
I'll put it in the postscript.
Perfect. But you kind of get into those situations, right? And it's uncomfortable. Like, it's not, our tendency as humans is not want to be in those uncomfortable situations. And so it's like, we can teach you how to tolerate it, just get control with it, right? The same thing for the tub. Nobody wants to be in the cold tub initially, right? It's just, you get in, it's uncomfortable, but if I understand, like, okay, I get to my breathing, now I'm in control of my body, I can relax my shoulders, I understand where my thought's going, I can direct it. If I can do it in this type of a stress response, why can I not do it there, right? And so it's been a huge thing for our players over the last couple of years. We've given them this experience and this tool to utilize, and it's been really cool in spring training. It's just a piece of what they do in the morning, and they'll come back and they'll be like, oh my God, I had the same feeling in the box. but I actually was able to like recognize it, step out, get to my breath for a pitch or two, or a breath or two in between pitches, and then get to myself to a better spot where I just trusted more of what I was ready to do.
Right.
And so I think that it's things like that. It's a lot of things, but it's really just helping them understand what tools you have, and then in the moment, if you recognize, the indicators of what your body's doing and what your mind's doing, okay, do I know which tools I need to use for this current situation to get myself back in that sweet spot?
Right. When you talk to Jason, Joel, and JC, like, we need to buy a couple cool tubs.
Yes.
We have that ice machine down in the facility that literally just fills our water bottles with ice. We need to do something else with it.
Yeah. There we go.
So I've been doing this I talked with Joel and JC in a couple of podcasts, the last two, and I mean, they've worked with, high level athletes. Like Joel's worked with Olympians, NFL player, like people who've won gold medals. JC worked with like Michaela Schifrin, Lindsey Vonn, and Steve Vale. So I had this question for, you work with people in the same field, what are the key factors, I would say, that differentiate the mentally strong and resilient players from the average player?
It's such a good question. Honestly, I'll probably give you an answer and then think back on this later and be like, I missed X, Y, Z.
There's a thousand ways to look at it.
Exactly. But I think some of the biggest things are, I do think your ability to tolerate discomfort is massive, because things aren't always going to go the way that you want. And sometimes I think you kind of get exposed by some of those players, and I don't want to be too old school in my approach with this, but I think like, if it doesn't take a lot to break you, then it's really hard to make it at the highest levels. You have to be able to withstand that. But I think if you can tolerate discomfort and really be willing to like expose yourself to it and embrace it when it shows up, I do think that that's a huge piece of it. I think having a purpose that's like bigger than yourself, which at times that can sound super eye-washy, but the more time I spend in professional sports, the more I realize it's true. And especially seeing like contrast between some of our American players and our Latin players, and just kind of like where they come from. And when they get into pro ball, their whole mission throughout most of their career is representing their family and their community. And genuinely, like when they get the opportunities, they want to go back. They want to give opportunities to other kids there. And they know that that's like, it can be viewed as not a burden, but like a heavy responsibility, but they wear it so well. And I think it keeps them in a really good perspective of having gratitude for the opportunity, but also knowing that like, I can't leave opportunity on the table. Right. So I think that that's a big piece of it.
So there's a good analogy. I won't see what you think about this. I forget who said it. I think it was Ben Brewster. He's a trainer flags guy that runs on the facility. Okay. But there's a whole kind of an analogy of like differences between training American kids versus training kids like in the DR or in Cuba or in a lot of American countries. American kids are playing like they want to make it to college, they want to make it to professional baseball. They're like, it's cool, but there's a lot more opportunity to do other things outside of baseball. Whereas kids in the DR, like they're training and they're playing to get off the island.
Yeah.
Right? Because usually they come from more impoverished communities, or they come from, everything's a lot, the standard of living in the DR is a lot worse than it is here. Is there anything that you notice from a mental standpoint that there's some, dealing with American-born players versus Latin-born players?
Yeah, I'd say that there's
a little more of an edge maybe to Latin players.
In some ways, I think they just enjoy, the game a lot more. They don't they view it as a job, but they also understand, like, it's a game, and it's the game that they've always played. And truthfully, I think that there's some truth to, like, we have a decent amount of players in our system that never played, like, an organized game of baseball until they were, like, teenagers or getting ready to try and, like, get scouted and signed somewhere, And so it's like they're probably 14, 15 years old by the time this is actually happening. And we have some players that are like, we found a pitcher in this remote part of the island in the Dominican, and it's like, he throws 99, and we were like, he's never pitched in a game, but we think that we can coach him up and help him do this, And so it's like, it's kind of wild to think about that. Like, we would never do that here, right? Sports so like organized here for better and worse.
Overly organized.
Exactly. And so I think that like if they bring the energy, they pick each other up, they have a lot more of a, I don't want to say that they necessarily care about the teamwork. I do think we have a lot of like American players that do as well, but it's just how they go about it is a little bit different. And I think, yeah, I'm trying to think like what some of the other big key differences are with that. I think sometimes it's just more of an educational standpoint, but they're a lot more eager to take the information that's being offered up and figure out how to apply it, where I just think because we have so much more organized and structured sport for some of our American players, the benefit is, especially when it comes to like sports psychology and mental skills, a lot of them have had some kind of exposure to it, whether they've heard it, whether they've utilized it, but it's trying to gauge like, okay, where are you at? What do you believe? Now how do I have to like kind of either course correct or just fit into what your belief system is, versus a lot of our Latin players truthfully haven't had a lot of exposure to that, and in some cases we've had to like almost really destigmatize like mental health and mental skills, because that is something that's very different there. Like it's a lot less welcome even than it is here to sometimes be able to utilize like mental health type resources, and so when they just associate us with psychology, sometimes they're like not ready for it. But once you kind of educate them on like, no, this is what it is. This is especially how we do it here in the Mariner system, and this is how it's going to help you by the time you step on the field. Then they're just like eager, like, okay, what else can I do? What else can I do? And you can almost like, if I wanted to, I can map out like this super specific detailed routine, just go do it, and they would do it every single day, all year long, which is incredible. But
it's just easier to, once they get bought in, they're all the way in.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes.
I know, that's why I try to incorporate a lot more mental skills work with a lot of guys who were in. It's funny to watch like guys who are just like, I did it, or I do it every once in a while. I'm just like, maybe that's something I just sound like that. I tell you now, like if you just commit to it, like really cool things happen, right?
Yeah.
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying this episode with Stephanie, even as the audio is a little bit muffled. I really do hope that you guys enjoy the value and everything that Stephanie's bringing to the show. I know she's got some very valuable insights on things that you guys can utilize as athletes yourself. I wanted to just take a quick moment real quick before we get back to her, talk about how much I really appreciate you guys watching the show, all your feedback, all the information you are taking away from the show. But I want to just make sure we can note that, this community, we want this community to grow. We love our community, but we love more people to be involved with it, get this valuable access, all these valuable insights that people like Stephanie, people like Joel or JC and Jason and Coach Mark Vig at Colorado Mesa or JL out at Porterville. There's plenty of athletes that need this kind of information to help further their careers, and I need you guys to help me reach them, right? So what I want you, I just kindly ask you to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Like the video, please share it around as much as you can, and help us grow this baseball community, help us grow the Fast Performance Baseball Podcast community to reach more and more people and help these people get more valuable insights. Now let's get back to Stephanie.
So one thing, I know you're huge on it, and it's something I've been working to incorporate with a lot of our athletes here and at other places I do consulting with, is, and hopefully I can use you as backup, that everything I'm trying to tell you guys, do it really helps, is the role of visualization for players and imagery and understand, and I try to, I don't know how I phrase this, but I work with them it's kind of like that pseudo Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours rule. For even 10 minutes a day, if you can get 500 to 1,000 reps of whatever the certain situation you struggle with. And maybe I butchered the science a little bit where I say your mind doesn't really know the difference between a physical rep and a mental rep.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm just totally speaking absolute junk science there. but it's like you're saying, with Hal or anybody else, where you can visualize yourself in that situation and you sit there all right, I've been here. I know how this works. I know what this feels like, and I'm more mentally prepared and more confident going into that situation.
Yeah. It's something that we like to leverage a lot with our players, and honestly, I think something we can incorporate more. I'm trying to find more opportunities to do it and get players bought in on how to use that. And I think that when it comes to players, traditionally a lot of times it's been okay, put yourself in the situation and just run yourself through almost like a scene, right? Yeah. And it's kind of this long scripted 3 to 5 minute thing. And as we look at the science more, we know that the 3 to 5 minutes isn't the best, but getting those short burst reps like you're talking about is actually going to be a lot more beneficial, especially when it comes to just like reinforcing some of those neural connections, which is going to translate then to like the movement patterns and things like that. So it's something that we've helped our players understand that like purely from just reinforcing those neural connections and just having things happen more seamlessly, more efficiently, this is a really beneficial tool that we can utilize. The other piece of that, finishing up on that thought, I think that's something that's huge, especially when we have players working on more like physical adjustments, right? If I'm trying to lower an arm slot, or if I'm trying to like make an adjustment to my swing or my load or something like that, and it's like, okay, great, this is something that you can actually really leverage for that. But then there's also the psychological component at times where we want to get players to understand, okay, if I can visualize this, now, yes, I should have confidence, and I should be able to kind of quiet any other noise or clutter that could be showing up. When I have that visual in my head, like we were talking about earlier, it kind of shuts off the analytical part of your brain. Like I can't be doing both at the same time. And so that's been a huge source of buy-in and desire for our players is like, okay, if I want to be committed, I want to be able to like be all in on this plan and this plan only. Like I'm sitting here, like great, put yourself in that situation, you know? And so we try to help get them to utilize that as part of their preparation, get their body and mind ready, but then also like how can you leverage that when you're moving from the hold on deck and things like that to start to quiet the noise, get yourself ready, just go do what you trained yourself to do.
Right. So where do you work on, you know, I say like baseball is a game of ups and downs, constant ups and downs. There's constant, there's times you're going to be high up on the roller coaster and there's times you're going to be down on the bottom. And, you know, where do you strategize with guys, and this might be goes back to the confidence thing we've already talked about, where, you know, dealing with, you know, not being too high when you're high, but then not being too low when you're low, and just find a way to like, you know, it's like you go back to that process oriented, like I stuck with the process, I just kind of, I wasn't lucky, you know, or then like my process is terrible, but I've been lucky. So, you know, how do you keep guys from being too high on far on the spectrum and just kind of keep them a little more neutral, maybe closer to the high, because obviously that feels way better.
Yes, absolutely. I think part of it is getting them first to understand, like, how do you even regulate yourself to keep yourself neutral? Do you recognize when you're starting to get yourself out of there? I think that's a big piece of it. I do think the second piece kind of ties back to some of what we talked about earlier is, like, do you even understand what the most reliable evidence is of my process was good or my process was bad, the results were good, bad. Like when we have good results, we absolutely want to celebrate them, right? But we want to understand that, like, how sustainable is that process if I keep doing it over and over again? So if I'm getting lucky and I have a shit process, then it's like, okay, I maybe need to start making those adjustments before the results get bad, and now I can sort of stabilize that thing. But, you know, when we talk, if we, example, talking to our hitters, like, okay, did you swing at the right pitches, right? If you were chasing a lot, or if you were chasing a lot, like, we have nothing to talk about. Your swing's going to look ugly if you're chasing pitches out of the zone, you know? Like, so I think that that's part of it. Then we're going to look at, like, okay, what was the contact like? Like, were we chopping a lot? Do we have hard hit line drives? Are we popping out a lot? Like, there's evidence based on what the ball is telling us of what's happening. You're swinging at the right pitches and making contact. And then I think the other piece of it is just, like, do they have awareness of what their between pitch process was? And so we talk about it with them a lot of, like, were you actually committed to your plan? And this is the hardest thing, because sometimes players will just outright be like, yes, I was committed. No, you weren't. Like, don't tell me you were sitting in a fastball middle in and you chased down and away.
It's a little bit of, like, I can look by your body language, you were not fully invested in that.
Exactly. But there's times where it's also not as clear, you know, and it's like, maybe I'm a little bit late on a pitch, or I swung at the right pitch, but I just whiffed on it, and it's like, okay, were you committed to this? But it's about stacking that evidence over time, and this is probably the hardest part for players, and truthfully probably the hardest part for players in pro ball, because they play every night, you know, and so it's like, it feels kind of do or die, and it's like, wait, hold on, you still have all season long, like, we're in May, you know.
And everything's magnified, too.
Exactly, 1,000%. And I get it, right? Like, there are a lot of consequences that feel so much more real at that level, and depending on where you're at in your career, and, you know, if you're ready to be a free agent at the end of the season, and things like that. So there's these realities to that, but I think helping guys understand what is the most important evidence. And truthfully, the most, like, important and reliable evidence is only the stuff that you can control.
Right.
And so if you're including other things in that, like, it's not ideal, you know.
Right.
It's one of those things that's just going to end up complicating it, diluting it more so. But I think maybe the last piece to that is like if you can regulate yourself, you understand what that reliable evidence is and kind of how to get to it, right? How to track that. The other piece is like, can you be coached hard enough to be held accountable to those standards? And I think that that's actually a really tough piece. I think that's tough for our coaches and for our players to do sometimes is, can you tell the player the truth? And can you tell them how they need to hear it? And can the player receive that truth? You know, and a lot of that requires the ability to like make sure that we're aligned. Like the coach and player understand that what we both want is the same thing. And I care about you enough to hold you to the standard. Because if there aren't standards at a high enough level, then it's like, you know that you're going to be too comfortable, and comfortable doesn't create good players.
Right. So bringing in, I like that you brought it, and we can kind of segue that, is how do you, and I mean, when you were with us when we were together at East, I mean, hopefully you can attest, like we were fully bought in with everything you guys did.
Yeah.
Me and AJ and then Travis down the line. Mm-hmm. But like, we were so bought in with that.
Yeah.
Right? Because we all were willing to, I mean, I don't know if we were willing to, I think we were previously bought in, and we're just like, I remember like AJ told me like, oh, we have this team of mental skills coaches, like these graduate students. I'm like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Right. So like, what's the relationship like with the coaching staff, like with the managers, with the assistants? You know, it's one of those things like, you know, dealing with pitchers, like, you know, the pitching coach will come to talk to the guy after he comes in after his inning or his outing or wherever he is in the game. Mm-hmm. You know, is there a piece where you guys are maybe a part of that conversation, or is that like just like, all right, you and I will talk before the game and we'll talk after the game, and then everything that's in game is between you and the coaching staff? And, you know, how do you guys create a plan of attack? And I know like they said, like the Mariners they've really begun investing in this mental skills piece of the game as well. You know, what is that relationship like, and how do you kind of balance that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this question because I feel super fortunate. And
dealing like with Scott Service and things like that. I like call it because I went to high school with kids, so there's my little chip in my
there we go.
Mariners.
There we go. Yeah, the thing I love most is like when it comes to our overall system with the Mariners, mental skills isn't this thing that just like exists on the side. You know, you talk about like the buy-in from the coaches. It's so important. And I'm probably going to catch some flack from this from other like professionals in the field. It's a very polarizing statement to make, and I understand why, but yes, there we go. I know you might get a lot of feedback for this too, but we kind of run under this notion that every coach is a mental skills coach, right? And
I know why people think that. Okay,
yeah, and I do understand like where that might rub people the wrong way. Yes, but hear me out. I do think there is validity in having a background, training, education in this.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, how are you ever coaching anybody if you're not coaching their mind along with it? Mm-hmm. Like, a coach talks to a player, it's impacting their mindset one way or another. So if we don't help our coaches understand that, nothing a player does happens independent of a mindset. So if we can't help our coaches understand that, then we're doing not just our players a disservice, but the whole system and organization overall, right? So, yes, we are the experts, we're the trained experts, and I'm a huge advocate that, like, you need those people to help get your coaches to understand this. But at the end of the day, especially in professional baseball, the coaches are there with the players day in, day out. They have the most touch points. I'm in town once every 4 weeks for a lot of guys, you know? Now, that's not the only ways that I'm communicating with them, but we know that, like, phone calls, texting, FaceTime, like, you can only get so far with that. It's not as effective when the coaches are the ones shaping the environment and having the conversations day in, day out. And so I say all of that because our system, like mental skills, is so integrated into what we do that there's not like an option. There is no like, can we bring Steph into this, or can we bring Byrne, one of our other coaches, into this? It's like, nope, they're in it, you know? And so we're a part of a lot of those conversations, but more often we're helping our coaches understand like how can I navigate these conversations? Which questions should I be asking? When should I not be having a conversation with player, which is just as valuable as figuring out the time to have a conversation? You know, like a lot of times, sometimes as coaches, we want to provide value and help the player like feel better. And like, well, sometimes helping them feel better isn't what's going to help them get better. Yeah, exactly. So I think that it's a huge piece of what we do. We're super integrated into we put together a player plan that's like a mapped out target of objectives for players that is like based on the evidence and what we know of you as a person. This is what we think your path to the big leagues is, and this is what we're going to really try to attack, and we sit in a room, we get the hitting coaches, we get strength and conditioning, we get the ATs, we get mental skills, we get, I don't know if I already said strength and conditioning, right? But everybody sits in this room, we get the analysts in there, and we say, this is what I see, this is what I see, this is what I see, and then we end up deciding on 2 or 3 of the most impactful things that can help a player out. So that when it comes to those times where we're having those conversations, there are times where coaches will call us and be like, hey, I'm struggling to figure out how to talk to this guy. Can you talk to him? Great, we'll go talk to him. But there's also times where it's like, hey, I don't know where to go with this, and then we help the coach figure out where they're going to go approach this, how they're going to take that conversation to the next point.
What's been the motivation for the Mariners to really make that investment into mental skills? I'm not going to ask you to talk about other organizations you may just have zero evidence, but what kind of drove them to we should make a major investment into this?
Yeah, I'll answer what I know. There's probably parts of that I don't know that happened before I even got there, but I think a large part of it happened when Jerry hired on Andy McKay as our farm director. I think that might have been back in 2016, and Andy's just got such an extensive background in not just researching but applying this stuff specifically in baseball. And so when you bring a farm director in, it's been a huge advantage for us coming in as mental skills coaches, because this space and platform for us and the advocacy comes from the top down instead of us trying to claw our way from the bottom up.
Right.
Which I don't know for sure, but I think that there are organizations that have that constraints they have to work against of trying to figure out how to not just be able to demonstrate value. They have to first say, this is how we can provide value, then get buy-in, and then demonstrate it in a way that everybody wants to be a part of it,
Right.
So I think that that's a huge part of it. And since Andy's now become the AGM and we brought in Justin Toole as our farm director, another guy who has a background in this, studied it, got his master's degree in it. And so I think it's one of those things where he understood it so well when Andy came in that he put together such a good system. And it took him years to do this, and he's pretty honest about how long it took and where it didn't go well when it first started, and then how it's gotten to the point now where I think it's really effective, and there's still ways that we can do it better. But I think that once it became clear that nothing happens independent of a mindset, there's no movement that happens without a quality of thought, it started to become more and more clear. And then he put together a really easy to understand system of okay, how does this tie into the things that we value when it comes to our hitting metrics, our pitching metrics. And we put together these processes where now it's so seamlessly ingrained that coaches understand it, and it's not just this eyewash thing. You know what I mean? There's substance to it. It's tangible. And so I think, we get asked a lot of times, think of the sports psych world, how do you prove your effectiveness? And it's really, really, really hard to do. I actually think in professional baseball we have an advantage because everybody's here to go perform well, right? We're to your point about sometimes at East, there are some guys that are just playing to play, and I'm hanging out with my friends, and that's fine too. There's nothing wrong with that, but how you work on mental skills with that would probably look a little bit different than here at the pro level, where it's no, we actually need to get this guy better. Yes, exactly. And so when we look about how do we actually demonstrate our value, the truth is we demonstrate our value by how a guy is performing on the field. Mm-hmm. If he's consistently passive in 2 strike counts or can't handle adversity, then that's a pretty clear indicator that hey, mental skills aren't doing their job. This guy's lacking in that. And we've had to have those conversations, Now, that's not to say that we just get bashed every time. We don't. But it's an accountability thing, I've gotten the call before of, hey, this prospect isn't doing what we need him to do, and we know that you've been a key part of communicating with him. So what's your take on it? What have we been doing? And there's this fine line of protecting the player's confidentiality and what they share with you, but also there's a ton that you can observe of yeah, I think he's really passive in early counts. So I think we need to work with him on just being ready more often. What does it take for him to get his mind and body ready? That's what I'm going to go work with him on. And that's what we'll communicate, which in to the player's perspective, I still think we protect the player and we make sure that there's nothing being shared that they wouldn't want shared. And to that point, it's well, you can see it. There's nothing that, it's pretty observable. And so it's I have to be able to be held accountable to that. My job can't be I want to be valued and I want to be really important in the org, but also, like, if the player's not doing something, I can't really explain why. That's not how any other coaching job works. So why do we, I think at times we fall into that.
That's a one-way ticket to finding, being out on the streets of Seattle.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, oh, no.
Yeah.
So we can continue, one more question on the teams aspect. Now, this is what I reflect all the time about why I think we did such a good job at East, was there was this huge team component to it. Like, I always think about every once in a while where I don't even remember who we would play, but like, it was like almost we were the only team that kind of like took you guys seriously in the rest of the league, which I'm hopefully, like, you go back to talk to your graduate like classmates, I wish I got to do what you guys did.
Yeah.
But like, like while the other team was doing their warm-ups or their IOs or anything like that, like we had everybody other than maybe the starting pitcher and the catcher and me, and you guys were in the dugout on the bench, and you went through the whole visualization thing. Like, beyond just individuals, because individuals can be kind of spotty, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, how can you do you work with, have like techniques, strategies when you bring the whole group together to kind of come together on one goal on the mental side, like, because you're dealing with everyone, some guys passive, some guys aggressive, some like, but you bring, there's a little bit of like everyone comes together for this one little exercise we all do together.
Yeah, it's a great question, and truthfully, I think that's something that I've had less experience with in pro ball, just by nature of more guys are there competing individually. That being said, like, yes, they're still competing as a team, and we do talk about that a lot, right? Like, your job, if you're going to compete well, is like, what's the right thing right now to get the team into a better position for the next play? Like, that's it, But I think when it comes to like working with teams in that sense, whether I think about my time at East or my time
at IMG.
Exactly. I think a lot of it comes down.
I should have noted that. In the intro. I'll fix that.
No, it's all good. I think the biggest thing with teams is understanding what is the standard you're going to set and why, and then having something of like, what is this going to actually look like? This can't just be like this conceptual thing where it's like, we're going to have positive communication. It's like, no, you're not all the time. You're going to be on the field, something's going to happen, and you're going to turn to your teammate and be like, what the hell,
Oh, probably a little more choice words than that.
Exactly. Try to keep PG, Or you're going to have that point in the game where you're like pissed at yourself and teammates are trying to pick you up, or they don't pick you up, and then that creates dynamics. So I think a lot of it starts there. I think if you understand what the standards are and what they look like, and then I think a big piece of it is like, how are you going to cultivate an environment that brings out those best qualities every day? Right. There's a lot of that responsibility that ends up on the coaches, like whether that's, the head coach, the group of coaches. I think the better the system is at doing that, the better you'll actually see it translate. But if you can understand how to cultivate that, right? So if it's like, trying to think, what are some like traditional standards that a team might set out, right? If it's like, I can actually think back, we made a poster for this at East at one point and put it in the out, right? But it was like, they talked about, like, there's no days off, right? We're all held accountable to this. Like, that was one of the pillars that they had for something. It's like, great, what does no days off actually look like to all of you? Cool, how are we going to address it when we have a guy who's not doing this? And then now the coaches have to support that, but the players have to be willing to manage it themselves, And so we have to create the environment where it's okay to do that, but we also have to know, like, what are we doing this for? And if we don't know what we're doing it for, or we're not all aligned on that, which I think is where teams actually run into the most problems. It's like, if I'm just using this as an example, but say that our mission was like, the whole point of this was that we really wanted to, like, win the conference this year, Well, if 30% of the team is all in on, like, yes, it means something to me to win the conference, it's going to be really tough to actually hold anybody accountable, because there's definitely going to be guys on the team that don't care about winning the conference, But I think that's where, and I think back to my time at East, man, I wish I would have pushed on that harder, but live and learn, right? You can figure out how to get better. It's just understanding, like, okay, that's the overall, why does this matter to each individual? Should this matter to each individual? And that stuff takes time and a lot of work, but I think it's worth the investment if that's something you all really want to do. And so I think that's the hardest part sometimes with coaching. Like, really takes an art to do that, to figure out where are things aligned, where are they misaligned, and then how do I try to collectively course correct? Like, you have this overarching group goal or direction, but now I have to gauge where each individual is, where they aligned or misaligned, and now tailor my coaching to that.
Right. So we can go back to the individual performance. And something I try to talk with guys is developing pregame routines, rituals, and things like that. What are things you guys utilize with the Mariners for, hey, this is your pregame process. This is what's going to get you in the right mindset, the right physical shape to go out and perform at the highest possible level. What are some strategies that, guys listening to this can be like, all right, maybe let's try this. And don't be like, try this one time and then it doesn't work for you. Like, all right, that whole thing was a bunch of bunk.
Yeah.
Right. But what are some strategies you found more often than not have worked for guys?
Yeah, such a good question. And it might be, I think, a little different considering like our pro ball guys, like they basically just wake up and get to the field and there's nothing to do between them. So their routines might look a little bit different, but you can still absolutely take all of these pieces. I think something that we recognized pretty early with our guys is like, they had no way of actually getting themselves ready for what they needed to do in the day. Like getting their mind and body ready to go do what they needed to do. And so we started to ask players more so in the off season of like, okay, what are some of the things you want to learn how to do better? And they were like, basically just get through my day, end up sitting around all day, and then it's like, oh, I have to go to the cages or I have to go lift. And
if you think summer baseball in high school is rough.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of the things that we'll try to get them to do is like, okay, hey, to start your day, like, where do we almost think about on that, like, classic 0 to 10 or 1 to 10 scale, right? Most of the time we wake up kind of groggy, body's feeling a little heavy. I'm probably existing in that 2 or 3 spot. I don't necessarily need to be at a 10, but I maybe want to be more in that like 6, 7 or 7, 8 range. Like, how do I get myself going? How do I get my nervous system alert? How do I get myself energized? So things that we'll leverage a lot is like, okay, get outside, get into some sunshine, get some sunlight in your eyes. We'll leverage the cold tubs a lot. So yes, I talked earlier about like being able to manage yourself in a stress response and get control of your mind and body. But truthfully, like that's a really good way to also start your day. Get in there for 1 minute, wake you up. You're going to feel amazing. You're going to get a huge dopamine hit, but you're also going to have a lot of like clarity and energy to like, okay, now I know this is what I'm going to go do today. Like if I need to go get ready to lift or I need to go get my defensive work in or whatever, like I'm ready to go. My body's alert. So we'll talk about things like that. For some guys, if they wake up and they're like, I'm honestly feeling pretty good today. I'm energized. I'm already at that 5 or 6. Like I don't really need to upregulate a ton. I kind of just want to stay there. So for those guys, we'll maybe leverage some things like either mindfulness practices, or we'll get them to a point where like, okay, let's do some breathing where we're not trying to slow it down, but we're not trying to speed it up. We're kind of just staying where we're at. Like, so we'll give them some certain cadences or exercises that help open up their rib cage and mobility in their thoracic region. And that just kind of gets them going of like, okay, I'm present in my body. I'm understanding how it feels, but I'm also regulating my breath. Like that in itself can be a mindful exercise of sorts. We'll have them do mindful walks. Or there's also like I would say more rare occasion, but still happens from time to time of like, I wake up, I'm anxious, like I actually need to slow things down a little bit right now. Or if you have, some kind of event going on, or even like for games, like sometimes guys are really nervous. They can be really high strung. Like how do you slow the heartbeat a little bit? So for those guys, we still leverage some of the breathing exercises. We'll change the cadences a little bit to have more extended exhales so they can actually slow down more of their nervous system and things like that. Sometimes we'll give them things like PMR, progressive muscle relaxation, like actually get into their body but feel it kind of release some tension, be a little bit more anchored, calm into the ground. And so I think that, or we'll even do like body scans. Like sometimes guys have no idea how they feel. And it's like, well, let's just kind of go head to toe. You have to be in control of your mind in order to get from spot to spot, like maintain your attention. But you also can be like, actually, dude, I'm really tight in my left shoulder right now as you're kind of going through it. Or like, my hips feel tight, or you go through the whole thing and you're like, I actually feel pretty good. And now it's just like a reinforcement, like I'm actually good to go for today, So I think there's things like that it's just do what you got to do. The last thing I'll add is like, sometimes we'll have them write, and sometimes in the morning it's more of like an intention, like, all right, how am I going to go about my work for the day? It doesn't have to be long. I think guys sometimes think like, I want to sit and write. 2 minutes, dude. You have 2 minutes today. But even just to clarify and put a word to it now makes it more clear. Like writing makes that memory recall. Like, no, this is how I'm going about my work today. And then we have post game routines too, which we can dive into that later if you want. But I think that's another important piece.
Yeah. Since we all have limited time, because you got a shock meeting that we found out a couple days ago.
Yeah.
Okay, leave you with two more things, and then there's a whole little advice piece at the very end of this. I usually do.
Yeah.
Where is this field? I was curious, like, where's this field, the sports psychology, mental skill set in baseball going to be in 5 to 10 years? I don't want you to like speculate or predict anything.
Yeah.
But is there going to be like a more, maybe they follow the Mariners model, where now all 30 teams and maybe 32 expansion happens.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Where everyone's kind of bought into this.
Yeah.
Everyone's bought into the whole process of having mental skills, like 3 to 4 mental skills coaches, or hell, even they maybe start having one on every team throughout the whole system.
Yeah.
Where is this field going in the next 5, 10 years?
Yeah. I think it's headed in that direction where it's starting, like the value is starting to be even more clearly understood and the application is starting to be more clear. So I can for sure see it happening where every team has one, probably has a team of them. They start to understand how to integrate into the systems better and specifically fit into like a professional baseball system. Like I do think that that's a little bit different than other places, but if you build a system for it, we can find ways to keep making it tangible and real.
Right.
I think that's the biggest thing. And I think that there's been a lot of professionals in professional baseball who have done it really well, and now it's starting to gain traction. It's just been one of those things of it's gained more traction in certain areas. But those people do good work, at least to others understanding the value and just getting the right professionals for the right fit in their org. So I do think it's headed in that direction. I hope it's headed in that direction.
Well, I know one team near here who probably will be very late to the party. They're late to the party on everything.
They do have a team though. They
do.
have a group. They have a group there, and they're pushing the game from the ground. So hopefully they get where they want with that.
So can you tell a story? You don't have to get really in depth with it or name the player, but like who's someone you've worked with that has been like your kind of your favorite success story that you like? This kid like gives you a shit ton of pride, and like I remember where he was when we started to where he is now.
Yeah. Okay, so we just had an individual who my very first year in the org, I primarily worked down in Arizona out of the complex there. So I say all of that because like when we get our draft guys in, that's where they spend the most time. And so it was like the first draft class I was a part of, got to spend a lot of time with this individual. And truthfully, like I can't take credit for anything. He came in with a pretty solid understanding of like the importance of mental skills, but not understanding as much of like, okay, what can I do to apply it specifically to get me ready to go pitch, right? And so it's like understanding then, like he would leverage the mental skills group a lot. I just happen to have the most touch points being with him in Arizona.
Right.
And so I felt like we set a pretty good foundation to just build off of what he already had, understanding how to use it, how to apply these skill sets. And it's been really cool now as he started to work through each level. He just made his debut this year.
Okay.
And got to a point of, one, it's like always great to celebrate that because if you actually look at like how many players actually make it,
right,
it's a super small percentage in the history of baseball. So to just see somebody like that be able to consistently do well, get to that level, make his debut, and then still have a lot of success there by also maintaining the same intent that he had when he was in Arizona at the complex,
right,
utilizing these same types of skills, but just understanding like, okay, how these things present or when they present for me is probably a little bit different at the big league level than when I was experiencing in Arizona, but the same skills still work. And now he just knows himself better. He understands the use of the skills better so that he can leverage it and now still maintain control of himself, good perspective, and executing the right way. And so I'd say that's like, he's the first guy that I've had from that first draft class make it all the way there and debut. And so I'm really proud of that and proud of him. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And it's truthfully credit to him and a lot of the other coaches along the way, but it's been cool to see how intentional he was with prioritizing his mindset and mental skills and now be able to do that and still have success at the highest level.
Okay, so one more thing, and before we get to the advice piece, what are some books, resources that, for people who are really want to get into the mindset game? Like whenever I tell people, like, what do I need to do to, get to whether, like, I can start work to master it. I'm always going with Dorfman stuff all the time.
Yep.
I'm a big fan of, like, Alan Jaeger, obviously, with meditation stuff. what are some like additional resources beyond obviously Dorfman and Revisa? Unless I'm gonna hit everybody. You're like, just go to all those guys. Like there's Dorfman, there's Revisa, there's Jaeger, there's so many other people.
Yeah.
Right? Obviously, this field is there's so many people in this field. It's kind of crazy that like there's not really a bad resource to go to.
Yeah.
But what are some of your favorites or things that people should probably check out?
Yeah, it's a good question. I love a lot of the stuff by Daniel Coyle, like Culture Code, Talent Code. And then he has some other like short excerpts and things like that. I think there's a lot of good stuff in there that he's purely just done gathering information and evidence from all different types of sports all over to see what are the things they have in common. And it's kind of crazy, like all of them have these 3 traits, you know, or whatever it is in common. And so I think it's a really simple but applicable read. I think, love that you already mentioned the Dorfman and Revisa stuff. It's just a classic. I
remember reading that stuff and just eating it up in college and stuff like that.
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of the Bob Rotella books are actually pretty interesting too. Truthfully, I'm just starting to dive into those. That's something I was introduced to once I started working for the Mariners. But when we talk about, you know, having visual external targets and things like that, a lot of that comes straight from his writings and his experience. So I think those are some good ones. Inner Game of Tennis is a pretty good one.
Oh,
classic.
That's a great one.
Classic. And actually, I just revisited this one. I read it when I was in grad school and just came back to it. But Chop Wood, Carry Water. I'm totally blanking on the artist's name or author's name of that book. But it's a really, really simple read. But if you look and go through each chapter, it's kind of like the takeaways are pretty profound when it comes to it. And like the way that I was reading through it, I was like, oh my God, this applies to like when we're talking to pitchers about this or hitters about this and whatever. Like I was like, this is great. This is exactly what I'm trying to say. Just said it way better. So that one's a good one. I think it's just a simple read. It's something, you know, I'll send excerpts to players at times and they'll be like, oh my God, can I please go buy this book? You know, and so I send it to them.
So I knows a lot about like the psychology and the mindsets. Like everyone I think kind of talks about the same things. It's just how can you make an analogy that makes sense to a certain person?
Yes.
That's what it really comes down to.
Yes. I think it's so crazy sometimes, like we can get so protected in the sports psych world. Like we're all talking about the same 7 to 8 things. Like there's not more than 7 to 8 mental skills.
Trust me, that's why Jason and I make fun of it, like the hitting coaches side when everyone's like in a big dick measuring contest where like I'm the better hitting coach and I'm the better hitting. I'm like, you guys are all talking about the same bullshit. You just have different verbiage for it. Exactly.
And then it's just which one makes the most sense and which one can you build a system around. If you can't build a system, it ends up becoming words, and words are only so effective.
Right. All right. So last thing, what's like a major piece of advice for your high school, college guy, maybe even some pro guys that are listeners are not in the Mariners organization?
Yeah.
What is like the best piece of advice for a kid who wants to make it to a college baseball or professional baseball that you've seen?
Yeah. I think the biggest advice I have is maybe this sounds like too much of a plug, but truthfully, I think like figure out what it takes to understand the mindset you need to do or mindset you need to get there, and then be willing to acknowledge like what am I already good at and what am I not. I think it's a really difficult thing to do, but I also think it's something that tends to go almost like unacknowledged at times. And it's like if you don't understand like what are the things that tend to break you, you know? And if I go back to like my college playing experiences or high school playing experiences, like I knew that for me it was like those pressure situations, like making a mistake in a critical situation in the game broke me. It broke me for 30 minutes. I remember coaches sitting me down and being like, I feel like I can't play you after this happens, you know, like you're a liability.
Yeah. And
it was really hard for me to hear that truth, you know? But I think you have to find ways to expose that in yourself. And if you can't expose it in yourself, find people that'll help you expose it. Because if you really want it, you have to be willing to hear it. Because then it's only at that point that you can figure out what to do with it. And when it comes to needing to figure out what to do with it, obviously if you have the ability and resources, go find you a mental skills coach. Because I don't think that'll ever be an investment that you regret. But if you can't do that, then start diving into some of the resources that we shared. Another big one that I forgot to share earlier was the Huberman stuff. Like I just think that that's making some of the science behind it even more tangible. Some good tools there, but find ways to gather those resources and start to dive into it and then be willing to challenge yourself with it. If you're not willing to challenge yourself with it, like, do you get to that point where you're like, this is hard and I hate this and it's uncomfortable? And if you don't, you're probably not doing enough. And so I think that that's probably generalized, but also really valuable. And if you can find ways to apply that and make it real for you, it does take that to go play high-level college baseball and beyond that to pro ball.
I like the way that you analogize that and kind of shrunk it down. Steph, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can people find you? Or like, you got anything to plug? You got like, where can they find you on social medias? Where can they reach out to you if they have other questions outside of this?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me, spend probably more time on like Instagram and Twitter.
Oh, yeah.
I guess we'll see what happens with Twitter. But yeah, I've still been on Twitter.
Gotta get on Threads now.
Yeah, I know. I do. I need to step it up. So look for me on Threads. I'll get it done. LinkedIn as well. Honestly, I'm a little bit worse at checking LinkedIn. I get a lot of spam messages, so I have a hard time filtering that. But if you reach out, I'll do my best to get to it. But yeah, those are probably main places.
Awesome. Steph, thank you so much for coming. It's great to have you. It's great to see you. Great to just be able to reconnect.
Yes.
All that stuff.
Thanks for having me back.
Awesome.
Thank you so much to Stephanie. I know her insights were valuable. I for sure learned a lot. I hope you did as well. She's just a great, genuine person, a really great person to be around. If you guys ever get a chance to meet her, please do so. Reach out to her on social media, please. She is always there to help. She's definitely, anything you guys might be struggling with, just shoot her a message, as she said on her Instagram or anywhere else you can find her. Thank you for dealing with the weird audio situation. That's on me. I will make sure that never happens again. There's a massive oversight on my part. But thank you so much for tuning in, gaining these valuable insights. And once again, I ask you to make sure that you like the video, share the video, and then subscribe to the channel. Make sure we can grow this community. Make sure we can get people invested into their own baseball careers. Learn from great voices throughout the entire industry. Learn from great voices and people who can be mentors to other athletes around the country. Really want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next Tuesday.